In the early summer of 1912, the town of Villisca, Iowa, was the kind of place where nothing bad ever seemed to happen. A town of barely 2,000 people, nestled among endless cornfields, where everyone knew their neighbors and doors were rarely locked. June 9th was supposed to be a happy day. The local Presbyterian church had just hosted its annual Children's Day event, a joyful gathering that brought nearly every family in town together. Among those attending were Josiah and Sarah Moore, well-liked members of the community, along with their 4 bright, cheerful children, Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and Paul. That evening, 2 young girls from a nearby family, Lena and Ina Stillinger, were invited to stay the night at the Moore home. After laughter, prayers, and bedtime stories, the house at 508 East 2nd Street went silent around 10 p.m. But by sunrise, Villisca would never be the same again. The cheerful, familiar faces that graced Sunday mornings would be replaced by whispers of evil and the metallic scent of blood that still lingers, more than a century later. The following morning, Mary Peckham, an elderly neighbor, noticed something unusual. The Moore household, normally bustling with activity, was eerily quiet. The chickens hadn't been fed, the yard was empty, and the blinds were drawn tight. She knocked once, then twice, and when no one answered, she tried the door. It was locked. A knot of unease formed in her stomach. She decided to call Josiah's brother, Ross Moore, to come check on the family. When Ross arrived, he used his spare key to open the front door. As it creaked open, an icy wave of dread seemed to roll out from the darkness within. The air was thick, stale, heavy, metallic, like something terrible had happened. Ross stepped inside, calling out for his brother. No reply. He moved through the parlor and saw 2 small figures lying beneath a blanket on the living room floor. He lifted one corner and froze. His scream tore through the morning stillness as he stumbled backward. What he saw beneath that sheet would haunt him for the rest of his life. Within minutes, the sheriff was called. Hank Horton, Villisca's lawman for more than a decade, arrived expecting some sort of accident. But nothing could have prepared him for what lay beyond that front door. As he walked through the small house, the realization hit him. No one had survived. Josiah and Sarah were found in their bedroom, brutally bludgeoned beyond recognition. Each of their children lay in their beds, struck repeatedly with what Horton recognized as the blunt side of an axe. Even the Stillinger girls, sleeping peacefully in the guest room, had met the same horrific fate. Every mirror and window in the house had been covered with cloth, and each body was carefully tucked under blankets, as though the killer wanted to hide his shame, or his work. Josiah's axe, the family's own tool, was found leaning against the wall near the bed, its blade stained and dull from blood. The crime scene spoke of rage, yet there was an eerie calm to it. Nothing appeared stolen. There were no signs of forced entry. It was as though the killer had been invited in. As the investigation deepened, the details only grew more disturbing. On the dining room table sat a plate of food that hadn't been eaten, a meal the killer had likely prepared himself after the murders. A bowl of bloody water sat nearby, used, it seemed, to wash his hands. In another room, half a slab of bacon was found wrapped in a dish towel, as though placed deliberately for some ritualistic purpose. Every lamp in the house had its chimney removed, dimming the light but not extinguishing it, a trick to move through shadows unseen. Sheriff Horton noted that the killer had spent hours inside the home after committing the crime, methodical and unhurried. The stillness was suffocating. Even flies seemed reluctant to move. Investigators tried to collect fingerprints, but dozens of townsfolk had already wandered through the house, trampling evidence in their morbid curiosity. By afternoon, hundreds gathered outside, whispering, praying, and weeping. A town once known for peace had become a monument to violence. By the next day, headlines screamed across the nation. 8 murdered in their beds. Reporters descended on Villisca like vultures. They came from Chicago, from Kansas City, from New York, all eager to uncover the mystery of the Villisca Axe Murders. Local hotels overflowed with journalists, curiosity seekers, and amateur detectives. The Moore's once modest home became a circus of gawking visitors. Yet, beneath the morbid fascination, a deep unease grew. People began locking their doors for the first time in Villisca's history. Mothers refused to let their children out after dusk. Everyone wondered the same terrifying thing. How could someone move so silently through a house filled with people and kill them one by one, without waking a soul? Some began to whisper about something unnatural, an evil that had entered Villisca that night and never truly left. The first suspect emerged almost immediately. On the night of the murders, several witnesses claimed to have seen a strange man boarding a westbound train out of Villisca around 5:30 a.m. He was described as wearing dark clothes, his hands and shoes stained with what looked like mud or blood. A conductor reported that the man had been nervously cleaning a long, metallic object wrapped in cloth. By the time word of the murders reached nearby towns, the train had already vanished into the plains. The authorities speculated that the killer could be a transient, hopping from town to town, striking at random. But if that were true, why Villisca? Why the Moores? The family had no enemies, no debts, no scandal. Even more baffling, the sheer savagery of the crime contrasted with the orderliness afterward. Every door was locked, every face covered, every act deliberate. This wasn't random. It was ritual. Some claimed the man on the train wasn't a drifter at all but a preacher, a traveling minister who spoke often of sin, redemption, and fire. And on that summer night, perhaps he decided to cleanse a house he thought was cursed. Reverend George Kelly, a traveling minister with a long history of erratic behavior, quickly became a person of interest. He was small, soft-spoken, and strangely intense. Kelly had attended the very same Children's Day event that night, even posing for photographs with the Moores before returning to his rented room at a boarding house nearby. The next morning, he boarded a train and reportedly told fellow passengers that 8 souls had been murdered in Villisca, butchered in their beds, long before the news had been made public. When questioned, Kelly's answers shifted. At times he seemed confused, at others disturbingly calm. He claimed to have had visions, divine messages warning him of sin and punishment. Locals whispered that Kelly was obsessed with young girls, often writing to them in strange, rambling letters about purity and salvation. He was arrested twice, confessed once under pressure, and later recanted. The case dragged on for years, but no conviction ever came. The evidence was circumstantial, and the town's unease only deepened. If the preacher wasn't guilty, then who was? The Moore house stood empty for years. Families who tried to move and never stayed long. Tenants complained of footsteps echoing down the hallways, children's laughter drifting through locked rooms, and cold spots that lingered like invisible wounds. One woman who rented the house in the 1930s reported waking every night at 2 a.m. to the faint sound of chopping wood, followed by a child's sob. In the 1960s, a group of teenagers dared each other to spend the night inside. One boy emerged screaming, claiming he saw a man in a hat standing over the bed, swinging something heavy. Another swore he heard whispering voices calling his name from the attic. Decades later, paranormal investigators would record disembodied cries, moving shadows, and unexplained drops in temperature. Some even reported scratches on their arms, as though unseen hands were trying to drive them out. The horror of 1912 had seeped into the very foundation of the house, replaying itself like a broken record no one could turn off. In the early 2000s, as true crime television grew, Villisca became a magnet for ghost hunters and thrill seekers. Teams armed with infrared cameras and EVP recorders entered the house, determined to uncover the truth. What they found only deepened the mystery. Recordings captured voices whispering names, sometimes Josiah, sometimes Sarah. A shadow figure was seen darting across the children's room during a live stream. In one chilling moment, a team left a toy ball in the hallway, only for it to roll slowly toward the camera, uphill. The footage became viral, reigniting the legend. But skeptics argued it was just folklore. Old houses creak, they said. People hear what they want to hear. Still, the question remained, if it was all in their heads, why did every person who entered the house describe the same feeling, that something in those walls was watching? That behind every mirror and shadow, the night of June 9, 1912, was still happening. In 2014, over a century after the murders, a young man named Johnny Hauser, a caretaker of the property and part-time investigator, decided to spend the night in the Moore house alone, without cameras or crew. He brought a sleeping bag, a flashlight, and a voice recorder. Around 3 a.m., the recorder picked up a faint knocking sound, rhythmic, deliberate, like the back of an axe tapping wood. Johnny later said he felt the air shift, as though the house itself exhaled. When he tried to move, he couldn't. For a full minute, his body was frozen, his heart hammering. Then a whisper close to his ear. "Get out." He woke the next morning in the parlor, disoriented, his flashlight smashed beside him. The recording ended abruptly at 3:12 a.m. The same time, investigators noted that neighbors had first heard noises on the night of the murders in 1912. Whether coincidence or curse, one thing was certain, the house still remembered. Over the decades, the Moore home changed hands many times. Every new owner believed they could live there without fear, without superstition. Yet none lasted long. In 1963, a couple named the Johnsons bought the house for a modest sum. Within weeks, they noticed doors opening on their own, lights flickering even when disconnected from power, and a constant faint smell of iron, like rust or dried blood. Mrs. Johnson once described hearing children giggling in the attic during a thunderstorm, though no one else was home. After just 6 months, they moved out. The next buyers, a pair of schoolteachers, reported having vivid nightmares of being trapped inside a burning house, unable to scream. When they left, they refused to even return for their belongings. Eventually, the house sat abandoned again, decaying quietly at the corner of East 2nd Street. The town considered tearing it down, but there was resistance. "You can't destroy what isn't done with you," one old man told the city council. He'd lived in Villisca his entire life, and claimed, sometimes, at night, he still heard the Moors praying. In 1994, Darwin Lynn, a local history enthusiast and former banker, purchased the property. Unlike others, he didn't want to live there. He wanted to preserve it. Lynn restored the home to its 1912 condition, removing plumbing and modern wiring, even placing period-accurate furniture where the originals once stood. His goal was to honor the Moors, not to chase ghosts. But soon after the restoration, paranormal teams began contacting him, begging to investigate. Lynn reluctantly agreed, thinking it would bring awareness to the tragedy. He didn't expect what followed. Visitors reported being touched, scratched, or suddenly overcome by sadness. One psychic claimed she saw a man with an axe standing behind Lynn during an interview. Even hardened skeptics walked out pale and shaking. Darwin himself avoided entering the bedrooms after dusk. "I don't know what it is," he told a local paper. "But it's not just memory. It's energy, old, restless energy that doesn't want to be forgotten." Experts tried to explain the phenomena scientifically. They said grief and trauma could imprint on environments, creating what researchers called a residual haunting, an emotional echo that replays under certain conditions. The Villisca Axe murder house, they argued, wasn't haunted by spirits, but by tragedy itself. Decades of fear, curiosity, and storytelling had turned it into a psychological trap, where expectation created reality. But for those who experienced it firsthand, that explanation felt hollow. Too many visitors described the same thing: sudden drops in temperature, objects moving on their own, laughter in the dark. In one instance, a paranormal group's thermal camera captured a heat signature in the shape of a child's hand pressed against the wall, though no one was near it. When they replayed the footage, a whisper could be heard faintly. "Don't wake them." It was moments like this that blurred the line between science and the supernatural, reminding everyone that perhaps some echoes are not just emotional, but intelligent. The haunting brought tourism, and with it, division. Some Villisca residents saw the house as sacred, a memorial to the victims. Others saw it as exploitation, a carnival of death that turned their tragedy into entertainment. The debate reached City Hall. "We shouldn't profit from pain," one councilwoman argued. But younger residents pointed out that the tours kept their small town alive. Every Halloween, visitors from across the country lined up to stay overnight. Some came seeking answers. Others came chasing fear. Local businesses flourished, yet the house's shadow loomed larger than ever. Even those who mocked the stories admitted they avoided walking past after dark. One shopkeeper swore that on quiet nights, when the wind blew just right, she could hear faint cries coming from East 2nd Street, and sometimes, if she listened long enough, the sound of a man's voice softly humming an old church hymn. In 2009, a journalist writing a feature on haunted locations visited the Moore house. During his tour, he took dozens of photographs. Later, while reviewing them, he froze. In one image, taken in the children's bedroom, a faint outline appeared behind the bed frame. It looked like a woman, her face blurred, her hands clasped as if in prayer. He checked the timestamp. That photo had been taken when the room was empty. Experts analyzed it and found no evidence of manipulation. The journalist refused to return, claiming that afterward, strange things began happening in his home. Radios turning on at night, clocks stopping at 3:12 a.m., and a recurring nightmare where he stood in a dark hallway, hearing the sound of an axe dragging across the floorboards. When he finally published his article, he ended it with a single haunting line: "Some stories never stop being written." In 2016, a team of investigators known as Ghost Frontier decided to spend 3 nights in the Moore home for a documentary. They set up thermal cameras, EVP recorders, and motion sensors in every room. The first 2 nights were quiet, small noises, faint whispers, nothing unusual. But on the 3rd night, something changed. Around 2:55 a.m., one of the cameras in the attic picked up movement, a dark silhouette standing motionless in the corner. Seconds later, all the lights in the house flickered. One investigator shouted as his handheld meter spiked, the needle slamming to maximum. Then came a sound no one could explain, 8 heavy thuds, echoing through the house like someone striking wood. They ran outside, terrified. Reviewing the footage later, they discovered something chilling. Every thud matched exactly with the time intervals between the murders as recorded in the coroner's report. When asked if they'd ever return, their lead investigator said quietly, "You don't go back where history breathes." People say the Villisca house feels alive, not metaphorically, but in the way the air moves when you breathe beside something aware of you. Visitors often describe a sensation of being watched, even when standing alone in daylight. Some say they see faces forming in the reflections of the windows, others hear their names whispered faintly from the attic. A local carpenter hired to repair the foundation once refused to finish his work, claiming he saw a child's handprint appear on freshly painted wood while he was the only one inside. He quit the same day. "That place doesn't want fixing," he told a reporter. "It wants remembering." Psychics who visit claim the energy isn't malevolent, just endless, replaying the terror of that night over and over, like a loop that time itself refuses to break. Every nail, every splinter of the house carries the memory of screams swallowed by darkness. Over a century has passed since that bloody summer morning, yet the Villisca Axe Murder house remains frozen in time. Thousands of visitors walk through its rooms every year, some curious, some skeptical, some reverent. The local museum still displays the original axe behind glass, and each June, the town holds a silent vigil, candles flickering outside the old home. For many, it's a ritual of healing. But others believe keeping the memory alive keeps the door open to something darker. The legend of Villisca has inspired books, films, and countless investigations, but none have solved it. No one was ever convicted. No motive was ever proven. The identity of the killer remains one of America's great unsolved mysteries, and perhaps that's why the house endures. It stands as both a monument to human evil and a reminder that some horrors refuse to die quietly. In 2021, a group of amateur historians uncovered old police documents hinting that the Villisca murders may have been part of a larger pattern. Between 1911 and 1913, similar axe killings occurred in Kansas, Illinois, and Colorado, all near train routes, all executed the same way. Each scene shared eerie details: lamps without chimneys, mirrors covered, food left uneaten. Some investigators now suspect a single itinerant killer, perhaps the so-called Axe Man of the Midwest. If true, the Villisca house wasn't cursed, it was chosen. A stop on a bloody pilgrimage across the plains. But others reject this explanation. They say too many strange things happened afterward. Too many coincidences, too many voices. The killings may have started with a man, but something else lingered long after he left. Something that fed on grief, on curiosity, on every frightened whisper spoken within those walls. Today, the Moore House stands quietly at 508 East 2nd Street, a modest white home with peeling paint and drawn curtains. By daylight, it could be any other house in Iowa. But when dusk falls, shadows stretch longer there, and the air seems heavier. Tour guides say that if you stand on the porch long enough, you might hear faint footsteps above, or the creak of bed springs in an empty room. Sometimes, guests report hearing the faint laughter of children, followed by silence so deep it hums. A few even claim to see candlelight moving behind the windows when no one is inside. Whether it's memory, myth, or something supernatural, one thing remains certain: the house remembers. Every breath of wind through its halls carries a whisper of that night, the prayers, the fear, the final, muffled cries. And if you listen closely enough, the screams beneath Villisca might just answer you.